What is going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Expert Bike Giveaway series. Today it's going to be a comprehensive review on this wonderful leader bike, the Yamaha R1. Stick around. So there's actually something pretty special happening with this R1. Here, let me go tell you about it really quick. And of course, you guys already know that this is our giveaway, Yamaha R1. Click the link down below, go to yamaneve.co and check out how you can get entered to win. Time is actually running out. There's only 5 days left to get entered to win this beast of a leader bike. And if you go to yamanevemerch.com right now, you can use the code FASTBOY, that's fast and then B-O-I. That'll give you 2x entries and 10% off to win this motorcycle. So hit the link down below, check that out, get yourself any piece of merch, and then go to the R1 sweepstakes and the email confirmation code, what you will receive after checkout. Use the code FASTBOY, 2x entries and 10% off. And also, you can win all these bikes too, because I am the great motorcycle god giving away bikes. So today's episode was powered by the folks over at Ridge Wallets. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about them at the end of the video. But for today, the R1 has a bit of a two-sided nature to it. This bike is a race bike with headlights, but it can exist on the street as well. Let's dive into the specs and the history of this machine. The R1, being a class-leading leader bike, does feature a pretty aggressive ergonomics package. It has a 34-inch seat height, some really high pegs, and some really low bars. I'm about 5'11", 6 feet tall with all my gear on, and I mount up on this machine. I can pretty comfortably flat-foot it, but as you tell, my feet go almost up to my butt over here when I'm on this motorcycle. The reach to the bars is a little bit long and you're really far down, so this is a very aggressive attack position on this motorcycle because it's designed to be on a racetrack. The R1 features 43mm fully adjustable KYB front forks. This is a great setup for road use, for weekend track warrior use. But if you're going to be racing this thing, if you're a true sociopath, you're probably going to want to swap out these suspension components. But I have heard of guys running very competitively with the stock setup up front. Over here in the rear, we've got a fully adjustable KYB monoshock as well. The suspension setup on the R1 is really race ready. For tires, the R1 is going to feature the Sport Standard 120/70/17 up front, but at the rear you have a plus-sized 190/55/17. Now that's probably due to the fact the R1's pushing damn near 200 horsepower and you want a little bit extra meat up here at the rear end. It comes stock with these RS10s from Bridgestone, which is a really great tire for track day use. And on road as well, they perform a little bit better than something like the Pirelli Supercorsa SPs in my opinion. The Supercorsas are very aggressive and very slippery in wet conditions, whereas these tires from the factory work super well. But in this tire size, you could fit anything you wanted to in R1. But if you put on Pilot Road 4s on the R1, I will come for you, and I will find you, and I will slit your throat. The R1 is going to come in at a wet weight of 448 pounds. Now, while that might seem a little bit heavy, this bike actually carries its weight extremely well. It doesn't really feel any bigger than a 600 on the street. And actually, in fact, while we're talking about the street, I'm going to kick it over to Spite, and he's going to give you his impression of it as a street motorcycle.
So before we get too far into my opinions about this motorcycle on the street, I thought it would be valuable to give you some background information on what my experiences are with proper fast motorcycles. So the first thing that I rode that was fast is a CBR 1000 RR. Now that bike is the obvious competitor to this, being another Japanese super sport. And then the other motorcycle is the Hayabusa we've got in the other room. Now that thing is completely different. And if you want to see all of our opinions on that, we did make a video comparing the R1 to the Hayabusa that nobody watched, but you should because it's really cool. So if you remember a little while ago, we put out a video of my first impressions with the R1, and that was pure raw first impressions, and it wasn't scripted, anything like that, and I was completely blown away by how fast this bike was. In fact, it actually fundamentally altered my understanding of what a fast motorcycle could be.
Jesus Christ!
In fact, it was so mind-altering that when I got back on my VFR to go home that day, nothing felt fast, no matter what I did on that motorcycle. And that morning I had thought, yeah, this thing's pretty darn quick. To be honest, it was a fundamental shift in my understanding of what I liked about motorcycles on the street, and it really showed me that speed is completely irrelevant. So if you think you're fast on your motorcycle, hop on one of these and try it on for size on the street, and you'll see how ridiculous a motorcycle like this can be. So now speed isn't the only thing that makes this kind of a bad street bike, and that's down to its super sport ergonomics, right? The seat here is made out of plywood. Literally, might as well just not be there, honestly. And when you're sitting on it, you feel like you're sitting on top of the front wheel. Now that's by design. Of course, it's a track day missile, so you want to be in that aggressive gargoyle stance, but it really is not conducive to a full day on this motorcycle. After about a half hour, your back starts to burn. It's just really unpleasant to be on it for more than 45 minutes. You really just wish you were on a naked bike. Now the next nail in the coffin is actually the engine itself. It throws off so much heat. It's in such a high state of tune, being at like a 13.5:1 compression ratio, pumping out damn near 200 horsepower. This thing literally breathes fire, and it dumps it all on your shins. You can't sit on this motorcycle without being in a just cloud of suffocating heat after 20 minutes in stop-and-go traffic. Now, once you do get this bike moving, it cools down a little bit, but again, you're gonna stop at a stoplight and it's gonna warm right back up. That's down to how all these nice fairings that are so aerodynamic and sexy just keep the heat in this motorcycle. Everything warms up, and it really is not a pleasant way to sit in traffic in a commute. Now you might be thinking, well, how does it feel when you finally get on the throttle? And when you do, it feels unbelievable. However, you're not going to be able to wring it out for more than 1 or 2 gears because of how tall the individual gears are. First gear ends at like 92 miles an hour, which for most people is above and beyond what you'll end up needing. So you're not going to be able to work the gearbox. And consequently, because this bike is so fast, the brakes are really, really touchy. You'll be able to tow yourself down to a stop really fast, but you're really not gonna need it. It's all overkill on the street. Now I hear you screaming behind the computer, but Spite, I gotta have a real fast bike on the street. I don't want all those Gixxer boys flexing on me. What do you got for me? Well, Yamaha makes this same bike in a more palatable package in the MT-10, and last week we did a whole video comparing this to the MT-10, so if you want all of the details, check that video out. Now, dressing up in a gimp suit on the weekend and running around in circles isn't exactly my thing, so let's pass it over to Yam to hear how the R1 feels on the track.
So as Spite mentioned, I spend most of every other weekend wearing full leathers and going around really fast in circles. It's one of my pastimes. But anyways, my background for track days and competition riding is I'm currently a CMRA racer in the novice class. I've done probably 100 track days at this point. Pretty well experienced, and the R1 is an awesome bike on track. It is extremely flattering to ride. It makes an awesome sound, and it makes you feel like a superhero when you're on it. So this bike, with all of its electronics and features and top-end components, feels absolutely sublime to ride on track. You crack open the throttle in B or A mode, it feels super predictable, really nice to ride. And in fact, if you want a full detailed breakdown on what this bike is like on track, my buddy Brandon and I did a full shakedown on this thing at Eagles Canyon Raceway, and there's plenty more to talk about than I can fit in this one video. But suffice it to say, this thing feels super, super good on track. It makes you feel like Rossi when you crack open the throttle, makes a super great sound. And with all the technology and features on it, it's gonna keep you safe while you do it too. This thing's got slide control, wheelie control, traction control, all kinds of stuff that is quietly working in the background, making sure you don't yeet yourself into the sun. So while the R1 works super great as a weekend track day toy, and I think that's definitely what 99% of riders are gonna be doing with it, some of the chosen few will actually take this thing as a competition machine. Now, if you're familiar with club racing or even maybe something beyond that, you know that trying to ride an R1 competitively is a very difficult task. Top runners in expert class around here in the CMRA club run extraordinarily fast, and you have to have 11 out of 10 yeet energy to really rip a leader bike at its full pace. So I would recommend, if you are thinking about competition riding, do not look at something like this. Start out on a small bike and get your level and your skills up. But if you want a fun track day weekend toy, the R1 is basically unbeatable. So a couple key modifications I would do to the R1 as a track day tool is actually not that many. So as you can see right over here in the front forks, we're right at the mid-stroke over here. We're not even close to bottoming it out under heavy braking. So I would leave the front suspension as is for a track day toy. The first thing I would do as well would be to swap the fluids and the pads on the R1. Now, although it does have this big beefy Nissan master cylinder and a really nice caliper setup and rotor setup as well, we found on track that the R1's brakes tend to fade pretty quickly, so get yourself a nice fluid flush and some good pads, and that should solve the problem. This is a top spec bike, so you don't need to get something like a Brembo RCS 19 if you're just kind of starting out and having fun with it, but overall, you probably should do that later on. The next thing I would do as well is, of course, tank grips. This bike has a ton of horsepower and a ton of flick over from side to side, so you're definitely going to want to have something to stick yourself to the motorcycle. The other thing I would do as well is swap out the exhaust. You're definitely going to want to be hearing your R1 make its awesome sounds while you're screaming down the back straight of your favorite track, and there's no better way to do that than with an exhaust system. In my opinion, you don't need to go with the full system with this motorcycle because it features titanium headers, so if you just get a nice slip-on that removes the cat and goes from the header back, you should be good to go. Get yourself a tune on this bike like we did as well, and you should be ready to rip. There's really not a whole lot else that I would do to this thing to make it as a fun track day toy. So now I'm going to bring Spite back in and we're going to sit down and chat about this motorcycle, give it our final thoughts and ratings, and discuss who should buy this thing. Alrighty, Spite, sitting down here, rounding out our thoughts about the R1, our very first big bad expert bike giveaway. This bike's been a ton of fun to own.
Yes, it has been so cool to have in the shop and rip around on. It's really cool just to open the doors and see it, because it looks like it's going fast even when it's standing still. It's so pleasing to look at, so pleasing to ride. Everything about it is so cool, and yet I can't recommend it for a single human being.
Really? You think so?
I don't think it makes sense for anybody who's riding on the street. Just bar none. You were chastising me about wearing the posting hat. It's post if you own this for the street. It's a bad motorcycle. It's uncomfortable to ride. It's too hot. It's too fast. You never even need to use the transmission. Yeah. It just makes zero sense. And it's too expensive. You can get an MT-10 for like $4,000 less. Well,
I'm gonna have to go in there and crack open our emergency supply of Eat Energy and inject you with some, because I think this bike makes a lot of sense for some people. If you're the kind of guy who wants to own one motorcycle that you're gonna take to the track pretty frequently, and you don't really want to have a multi-bike stable, the R1 makes a lot of sense. If you're not going to be riding a ton on the street, it's great. For quick rips around town, quick rips on the country roads, the R1's pretty badass, I think, honestly.
I mean, my only issue with it is when you spend any more than a half hour on it. For that first half hour, it's a great ride. It's a ton of fun. You can really just get in with the whole situation here. You feel fast. You sound fast, but then after 30 minutes, you're like, I'm done. I want to go home. Yeah. And that's kind of like the session-based track day experience. Totally. You're on for 30 minutes, off for 30, on for 30. That's where it makes more sense.
Yeah, and I think one thing we didn't even mention in the video, but now I feel like we didn't even have to mention it, is the looks, right? I mean, I think a big reason why people buy something like this is because it is just so drop-dead gorgeous of a motorcycle. We're filming in here and I literally had to stop every once in a while and be like, what a great looking bike, you know? Yeah. As if it was alive and have to compliment it. But man, it is just so pretty to look at, and it's just, it has a lot of curb appeal, I think.
Oh, absolutely. You don't look at this and see it as anything other than just a complete fashion statement. It looks so good. It makes you feel good. The look back factor on this is second to none.
Yeah, I think the overall riding experience is pretty awesome, and I think if you're gonna build up your tolerance for it, you probably could ride it for longer than 30 minutes on the street, but it's not designed for that, certainly not.
Exactly, and that's one of the concessions that I have to make. Despite my own predilections, I have to understand that this is not meant to be a street bike. Yeah. They took the M1 and they put lights on it. That's really what happened here. Yeah. So, again, I understand what it is, but as a street bike, don't buy it.
And hey, as much as I am a fast boy, my daily ride's a scrambler. So even though I do love sport bikes and I have a race bike myself, I don't want to ride this thing on the street either, honestly. Yeah. So it's one of those things. So what do you say we give a final thumb in the wind number for it?
Yeah, I think mine is going to be influenced specifically by the fact that I'm a street-only rider right now. And as a street-only rider, I have to rate it the way that I would rate any other motorcycle. And that's probably like, this is a 3 or a 4 for me. It makes such...
Everyone's about to kill you.
Everyone's about to kill me. It makes such an amazing first impression. But it sucks to ride for anything more than a half hour.
Yeah.
It's too fast. You don't need to use the entire transmission. You can just get by on first gear. It's really not that much fun outside of, oh boy, I'm going really quick. And then, oh, I gotta be a good boy because there's a cop right there and I don't want to go to jail.
Yeah. And that, I think, is something that I will agree with as well, is that although this is a fantastic motorcycle and I have a very different rating than you do, I do agree that it is not the most fun, honestly. Like, it's fun for a little bit and the wow factor, the power is there, but after a certain amount of time, there's only so much you can do with it on the street.
Exactly.
But my score is different because I know what this thing can do on track and I know what it makes me feel with on track, and man, is it a good bike. It is just so well set up from the factory. It makes you feel so awesome. For me, it's like a 9.5 out of 10 for that reason, because it is just so freaking good.
I could see that. I can totally see how this thing, just, you show up to a track day, and you're like, yeah, I'm on an R1.
Yeah.
I've got a fancy boy bike right here.
Got all the electronics, everything you could ever want. I mean, it's just so fully ready to go from the factory. It's a super fun bike. So much so that every time I ride this thing, I keep trying to convince myself that I need another track bike as a little toy for a leader bike. I'm thinking of this or an RSV4 just to have in the stable, just because they're so awesome. They're so flattering. You're not gonna be setting lap records or anything, but they're so fun to ride. So I think mine's a 9.5 out of 10. Yeah, it's a really awesome bike. But I get why you would rate it so low. If you're only riding for the street, why? Why would you do this?
Yeah, there's so many better options. I mean,
MT10,
Super Duke R,
dude,
they're all so good. The Hyper Naked class is in a league of its own right now. So if you want to be a fast boy on the street, maybe check out some of those naked bikes.
We need to take a second and shout out our sponsor for today, Ridge Wallets. They're a longtime partner for the channel, and it's for a good reason. They make the best minimal everyday carry wallet out there, made out of a range of durable materials in a whole bunch of colors. If you want your wallet to look like the link pipe on the R1 all blue because that's what race bikes look like, well, they got you covered. Or maybe you want to color match it to your bike because you're a biscotti boy who buys all your gear to match your motorcycle because you know you can't go fast without looking good. Well, they got you covered there too. It's the superior money containment system, and it can be yours today by clicking the link down below and using the code YAMMYNOOB for 10% off your order and free shipping. Do it. You know you want to.
Well, howdy, partner. How's it going? Now this video's over, but I'll tell you what, you click on this one right over here, you can keep watching yourself some YAMMYNOOB. And if y'all didn't know, we're based out of Austin, Texas, so click on that video, you might check out something cool.